Hello, welcome back to the Fruit Snacks Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Wardrop from Drop to War Life Coaching. And today we have a special guest, Kristen Mattison. You want to say hi?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So, Kristen is also a life coach and she is a blogger. Her blog is beautiful and has a lot of really fun content at thisroutinelife.com. That's right, right?
Yep, that's right.
So, why don't you kind of introduce yourself a little bit?
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So I'm Kristen Mattison, and like Emily said, I am a certified life coach. I also have my master's in counseling. But what I'm most passionate about is to help moms lessen the overwhelm in their life and enjoy motherhood more. Because I find that as moms, we carry so much in our brain, right, that causes us to feel so overwhelmed a lot of times. And sometimes it's overwhelmed from our ever going to do list, and sometimes it's overwhelmed from a situation we're trying to think through. But we carry a lot of overwhelm, and that can rob us of enjoying motherhood. So I created the blog because I loved routine and I loved seeing how others spent their time. And in my head, I always thought that, like, if I could just grasp how to spend my time correctly, I'll be more productive and I won't have any overwhelm and everything will go perfectly right. But we know that's not really how things go. So that's why I started the blog in 2019, was to help moms figure out routines, moms of young kids, stay-at-home moms. I was a stay-at-home mom at the time, figure out routines that worked for them, how to spend their time. And then I also started to branch out into more like real topics. Like, I wasn't feeling fulfilled as a stay-at-home mom. So one of my most popular blog posts is tips to feel fulfilled as a stay-at-home mom. So I started talking more about that stuff too, like what to do when you're feeling like you don't enjoy motherhood. So I've kind of, branched into not only the very practical and tangible tips, but sometimes things that we can do, how we can change our mindset to enjoy motherhood more. And I think that's what we're going to be talking a little bit about today.
Yeah, for sure. So, motherhood on its own, we have all the overwhelm, all the things. Like I always like to talk about how food has always been a thing for me. Like, I
Okay.
hate food. Why do these kids have to eat so many times a day? Blah blah blah. And then the diabetes diagnosis. I'm like, oh great. On top of having to feed them, I have to calculate carbs and dose them insulin and
Right.
all the things, right? And so overwhelm just shot through the roof. I mean, overwhelm is the feeling that you feel at the hospital on diagnosis. Like, we're very familiar with the overwhelm. Like, it never goes away. And so let's dig into overwhelm. And then I also want to hit worry and guilt. So tell us more about overwhelm and what we can do with that. And then we'll pivot a little
So
bit.
there's a few things. Like I mentioned, let's talk about first the overwhelm in your mind. So you get that diagnosis that your child has T1D. And in that doctor's office, you're feeling so overwhelmed. And then you're coming home and you're thinking about all the things you have to do, probably, right, to manage this. I'm sure there's the worry about the future. We'll talk about that separately.
Mhm.
But in that moment, one of the things that you can do is really give yourself grace. I think if you can offer yourself grace, it kind of diffuses things a little bit. Like, remember that you're a human being too. And that, yes, I'm a human being. I'm a mom. I love my child dearly. Of course, it's going to make sense that I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. Of course, it's going to make sense that I feel like maybe I can't handle all of this right now. So if we can get into that grace place, I think it kind of like softens the overwhelm and also stops the cycle of, like, I like to say that it's like the yelling. It could be the yelling cycle, but not maybe necessarily in this situation. But when you're feeling overwhelmed, I find that I'm very much more likely to snap, right? Or to like be short. So even in that situation you just talked about, if I was feeling overwhelmed in the doctor's office, I'm sure my thoughts wouldn't be on what the doctor's saying right now, right?
Mhm.
I would be all caught up in my overwhelm and probably also maybe short with the doctor. But if you can offer yourself grace in that moment, I think you can help yourself to be very present. And then after too, if you're like all of a sudden thinking about all these things you have to do, taking a deep breath, remembering that you're human once again, and that you will get through it, right?
Mhm.
You love your child dearly, and no matter what it takes, you will get through it. So I think grace can help in so many situations. What I talk about a lot too is using grace when you're dealing with your kids. If they're in a situation that is really, let's say you do yell, let's say you do get, upset, maybe you say some things you regret. If you don't go into that guilt cycle and tell yourself, I'm a bad mom. I'm not showing up the way I want to. My child's going to hate me. I would always go to the place of like what issues my words were causing my child in the future. Like that's when I would do something I wasn't proud of, right? I would always go to that place. And that never gets you in a good place either, because what it would do is that guilt would cause me to yell a lot of times because I have this underlying feeling that I don't like, right? We don't always love feeling guilt, this emotion. And the action from that place would be to be more upset with my kids or more upset with myself. So therefore, the result is that I'm not showing up as the mom I want to be once again. But if I can give myself grace and just say, wow, that was rough. Maybe you shouldn't have said those things, but you know what? You'll do better next time, go, maybe then from that place of grace and forgiveness for yourself, you can actually maybe go and apologize to your child or have that conversation. So I will tell you, I actually had this happen this morning. I reacted a way to my son that I was not happy about. Like he is a very active kid. So he's always moving around. He's loud. He like screamed in my face over something. It wasn't in an aggressive, mean way, but I reacted in a way I didn't like. And right after that, I had the thought like, oh my gosh, I'm going on this podcast to talk about how to be a good mom. Right. And now here I am. And as I remember, I was in the fridge getting the creamer. I kind of just said to myself, okay, you know what? You're not a bad mom. Relax. And I actually looked at my son after that and I said, I'm sorry. We both laughed. I'm like, I'm so sorry I responded that way. I said, like, you screamed in my face. That was my first reaction, so, and we both laughed and he was like, it's okay, so, but I think if I had got on myself about it and felt guilty about it, I would have continued down that spiral of like being short with him, being mad at myself. So, I think grace is always a better option. And also reminding ourselves that we have a choice how we want to treat ourselves and how we want to think about things, so we always have a choice to use grace instead of guilt with ourselves. I feel like I got off on a tangent.
That's okay. That was perfect. So grace is always a good hack, right? Tap into the grace for ourselves instead of going into the guilt cycle for sure. Right. So, and one way that is really easy for me to get into grace nowadays is thinking about my nervous system. So when your son screams in your face, your brain is actually hijacked and your nervous system goes into fight or flight. And we are wired for, our brains are trying to protect us. And that is a threat. A scream in your face. Are you kidding me? And so for you to be able to bring yourself down from that like, of course I reacted that way. And you even explained that to him. That's, I'm sorry when you scream in my face, I naturally react that way. Then they understand when they naturally react that way, because they're going to, do as we do, not as we say. Right. And so if we're like, what is wrong with you? Why are you screaming at your sister? Why are you, well, because there was a trigger for them, and that's just how our bodies work. And so the more we can give them an example of grace and that we're all imperfect humans doing the best we can, instead of expecting perfection out of them so that we don't have to misbehave, right? That there's just grace all around and we can all just laugh at it and move on and not have it ruin the whole rest of the day.
Right. I have to say too, that I've worked a lot over the last few months. I always thought I was like easy at like good, like treated myself kindly. And I've really had to I'm working with a coach, like delve into how I'm treating myself. And I've noticed that wasn't the case, and how, because I wasn't showing myself grace a lot of the time, I was projecting that out onto others, right? Because, like you said, it's like, if you are giving yourself grace, you're much more likely to allow others to have make their mistakes and stuff. But if you're not, you're going to really point out everything that they do too, which turns into being very critical towards your kids.
Yeah. And so either way we notice it, right? Maybe, like you said, maybe we think that we're kind to ourselves, but we're very critical of them. We're probably critical of ourselves, and it's just buried deeper and we need to dig it out. So I just wanted to share one Overwhelm hack real quick before we move past Overwhelm. And it actually comes from Frozen 2. Anna got it figured out. That if you're in overwhelm, like you just described, even in the doctor's office, I'm sure other T1D moms have had this experience where we're sitting there and the doctor is talking and we don't hear anything, because again, Our brains are hijacked by our nervous system. We're completely overwhelmed. We're completely freaking out, all the things, and we literally can't hear. It's like the wah, 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 and Charlie Brown, And so, like you said, take a breath, right? And then really the hack is just to narrow it in, like what is the next step? What is one thing I need to do right now? I talk a lot about how when our diabetes monitors go off, like the beeping starts, it actually triggers our trauma that we, have from probably a traumatic experience at diagnosis. So every time there's a beep going off in the house, which is a lot, then we go into like fight or flight, right? So we have to remind ourselves, like, breathe. We don't need panic right now. We just need to go see what that beep means and what is the next right step, right? So just a small little step instead of the overwhelm is like too big a lens. So if we're overwhelmed, we just narrow that lens and find the next.
I love that. And I think one thing too that I talk about sometimes is even just grounding, right? And you may have talked about this, but like, just like feeling in that moment when the doctor's talking, I'm just going to feel like my pads on my fingers, right? I'm just going to like look around and notice like 3 things to try to ground ourselves, to get our nervous system back to a calm place. I think that helps. And I've actually done that with my kids when I feel my anger rising too. It's like, what can I focus on that's going to get me back to a place where I'm coming from intentionality instead of like reacting?
Yeah. I mean, any little thing, like even trying to get out the door in the morning, that's overwhelm, right? The kids aren't doing whatever they need to eat, their shoes are lost, all the things, and to take 1 second to just breathe. Like breath is always a tool we have right there handy in the moment. And instead of the tool we tend to go to in overwhelm is like freak out and yell and scream and make it all worse. So we think we don't have time to get grounded. We don't have time to not get grounded. Like we really do need to get present. Okay, what is the next thing that I need to do instead of, I'm so overwhelmed because there's so many things to do. Like literally one thing at a time. And then, Okay, so we talked about grace instead of guilt. Is there anything more you want to talk about with that? Or should we go into worry?
There's, what do you want to go on to?
Worry.
Let's go on to worry. Okay. Let's talk about worry. Okay. So one of the things that I have found the most helpful, and that, you and I went to the same life coach school, is when the teaching of the 50-50 and accepting the bad and good in life. And I know you've talked about this on the podcast too, but I think when I want to say like marinated in that and really understood that a lot of the misery I was feeling was because I was resisting and fighting against things that were happening that I didn't like, it opened up this new sense of peace for me almost. Like I felt so much more confident and peaceful. I don't know if peaceful is the word, but more confident in parenting. So So basically what I say is when I say the 50-50, I think you might've talked about this, but I'll talk a little bit more, is that, 50% of the time you're going to feel bad, negative emotion, worry, guilt, maybe frustration, anger, and all the negatives that you don't like. 50% of the time you're going to feel joy, happiness, and that's because life is made up of that. We've all lived a life where bad things have happened to us, right? You received the diagnosis that you weren't expecting about your child. And you've had good things happen to you too. So there's kind of like a balance in life, right? And that's just the reality. It's been that way since the start of time. Bad things have happened and good things have happened. But when we're pushing against the truth of like the diagnosis, or we're pushing against the truth that maybe, even just like our child is misbehaving in such a way in the moment that we're fearful, we're thinking that something's going to happen to them. We're really denying. Oh my gosh, I lost my train of thought. So when we're pushing against, like, let's say the diagnosis, it's causing us this undue misery that we don't really need to have. And talk about not being present, right? When we're like trying to think about how unfair this is and this shouldn't happen, which are totally normal thoughts to have, by the way. I don't want you to think that that's not normal. But it is causing us sometimes undue misery. So when you can accept and it doesn't happen right away. Like if you get that diagnosis that your child is T1D, has T1D, it doesn't mean that automatically you're going to be like, oh, this is life. This is the 50 of 50 of life, but you'll recognize over time that like maybe if it's really affecting you, that this is the reality. And once you can get on board with the reality, you're going to be able to make decisions from a much more confident place, like I said. So when I could really delve into that and know that things in life are not going to go the way that I've planned, not only for me, but for my kids. Most likely my kids are going to face challenges. There might be some devastating things that happen. And that's just life. And the worst thing that's going to happen is an emotion, right? So the worst thing that's going to happen is I'm going to feel grief. I'm going to feel scared. I'm going to feel worried. And I know I can feel emotions. So when I really leaned into that, I was able to like have conversations with my kids. So I'll give you an example. I was like laying with my son one night to put him to bed, and he started talking about some stuff that was going on at school. And in the moment, I started thinking like, oh my gosh, if this continues, is like, I was asking myself, is he being bullied? Like if this continues, I started like running off with the worst case scenario, right? The worrying about what if what he's telling me leads into this stuff. And it took me away from being there in that moment with him and just listening. And I started thinking about like solution focused, my anxiety started revving up, thinking about, especially at night too. I have to say, for me, after 7 p.m., my brain just wants to look at everything that's like find ways to try to keep me safe but also freak me out. Right. So it's like, yeah. So I always say like nothing, I can't make decisions after 7 p.m. I shouldn't have difficult conversations after 7 p.m. And I have that awareness now that laying with my kids at that time, if they bring stuff up, I'm probably not going to be coming from my logical brain. But one of the things that I do, getting back to the story, is instead of letting my brain run away, I try to just focus on, like you said, what's exactly happening in the moment is my son is saying words to me and he's saying these words to me. And how can I be present with him? And a lot of times it's just listening to him, right? And then if I need to take action later, I can. But what your child really needs is for you to be there present with them, not to be all up in your own anxiety and your worry, because that's the other thing. Like once I start to feel anxious, I kind of just want them to stop talking, right? Because I start thinking like, the more they talk, the more I feel like it's my job to have to do something sometimes in those situations, right? So it's like, oh, okay, just shut it down. And you could be shutting down some very important information if you let your worry and your anxiety get carried away with you. So I've kind of just started to use that tool. And let me tell you, I used to go to bed at night and stay up, as I'm sure all of us moms do at some point, stay up in complete worry about either what was going on in the world or what was going on in the day with my kids, and just let my brain run away with that stuff. And now that I can rest and know in the 50-50, though it doesn't sound like hopeful, that some of this stuff might really happen, but there's no need for me to worry right now in this moment about it, and knowing that I can handle it because I can handle anything. I can handle an emotion. It's helped me to connect with my kids and be able to really listen to them, but it's also lessened my anxiety and my worry. And I think made me just like a more confident, better parent overall.
Yeah, totally. Because when we're in worry, we've taken off into the future, right? And so when, again, we can bring it back, stay present, nothing is actually wrong right now. And if there is, then I'll handle it. So in the middle of the night, we like to stay up worrying. Usually, maybe we can fall asleep at night because we're so exhausted, but then we'll wake up after a few hours, and then getting back to sleep is the tricky part, right? And so, and maybe you woke up in the middle of the night because, again, one of those diabetes alarms goes off. So you go into panic. Takes your body a long time to come down off of that, especially if we just let it run wild, spinning in the worry. So you go, you check on your kid, you take care of whatever, and then you get back in bed knowing I've handled it. She's fine. He'll be fine, whatever, and then soothe ourselves that it's okay. It's fine. And in this present moment, everything's fine. I took care of it. It's fine.
Right. Just coming back to the present moment.
Because maybe something, scary will happen in the future, but I'll handle it in the future. In this moment, everybody's fine. So
exactly.
Just always bringing it back to this moment. What do I need to do now? Nothing. Okay, then I just need to calm myself down and do the best I can to get better.
And so far my kids are 8 and almost 11. So far, some like that situation I told you about, I had used as an example, like probably 95% of the time, those things that my brain starts to get worried about don't even turn into anything. Like
Right.
I'll ask the next day, hey, what happened with so-and-so? Nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what do you mean nothing? Well, how do you feel about it? I'm fine. It's like, can you imagine if I had got all up in arms
Yeah.
and like emailed the teacher
Oh,
the
yeah.
next morning and
Well,
been
and
like,
knowing yourself that after 7 o'clock, my rational brain's gone.
right,
Hello, our children don't even have that prefrontal cortex developed yet. So
right.
at all times a day, the rational brain has got,
Yeah, that's
so
true.
like taking in what they're saying with a grain of salt instead of, like you said, running away with our own anxieties about it. And especially late at night. Like my daughter every night is like, I don't want to go to school tomorrow, and she like makes up these crazy stories and I just listen and let her process her emotions, whatever, and don't get all wrapped up myself in her story. And then in the morning after she's had a good night's sleep, she gets up and goes to school. Like, and then she comes home and I'm like, so how did recess go? Did what you were worried about was going to happen? And she doesn't even know what she's worried about. Like I'll literally say, and what do you think is going to happen? I don't know. I'm just scared, And so there's only so much coaching you can do to, a 7-year-old when her brain is offline, So especially at night, like all she needs is go to sleep. So we don't need to like keep them up, talking through it, trying to figure it out just to ease our own anxieties. Like we have to learn how to calm ourselves down in order to be a safe place for her to just calm down and get to sleep. Right. And then in the morning, she's all better. And if she's not, then maybe on a more rational brain, we can talk through some things. But
right.
Yeah.
That is a great example.
And that is why I always say, like, as your T1D mom coach, I'm here to help you manage your own mental and emotional state while you're managing your child's diabetes, because you have all your doctors, your nurses, everybody to help you with the diabetes, but there's just so much brain drama and emotion drama and nervous system regulation, all the things that we've got to take care of ourselves. We're just expecting our kids to know how to do this, but if we don't figure it out, there's no way they can.
I love that. I think that what you're doing is so important because that is so true. Like we as moms have so much more control than we recognize over our mindset and how we show up, right? But a lot of times we need somebody to show us that because it's hard for us to see it, So, and how you show up. I mean, as I said, I'm working with a coach too. I'm noticing that even though I know this stuff, I've been certified for a long time, as a life coach. I am seeing in so many instances how my reaction to things, how I showed up in a situation with my kids or my husband, how it resulted in whatever occurred, whether it be good or bad. And I think that, what you're doing is so helpful because this is a lifelong diagnosis that their child will be dealing with, right? And it's like the sooner as a mom that you can start to control, that is it projects out into the whole family and how your kids respond to their diagnosis and all those things. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, totally. Because, as coaches, we didn't, certify out of being humans.
Exactly. Thank you for that reminder. Right. You're right.
And coaches all have coaches because we know that we're still, so when we have the coach hat on, we can see someone else's brain, but our brain is still just a mess. And, and then there's that whole layer that you described earlier of kind of the imposter syndrome where like, I'm like, how am I supposed to help other moms when I'm such a mess myself? But we do somehow. It's still possible because we're all a mess. And that grace, back to that grace, right? So Kristen, tell people how they can find your blog or get a hold of you or.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, like Emily mentioned at the beginning, you can find me at thisroutinelife.com. So it's just like it sounds, thisroutinelife.com. And if you go to my website, you'll find right on the homepage that I offer an amazing quick guide to lessen overwhelm and enjoy motherhood more. It's actually an ebook, a PDF download. It's over 46 pages filled with tangible and like mindset tips to get your overwhelm under control. So it's broken down into routine, time management, productivity, sanity and self-care, and how to be a less angry mom and a more calm mom. So I've kind of taken everything on the blog and condensed it into a really great guide that can help you with anything you're going through that day. If you need help with a new routine, reference the routine. If you feel like you're going to lose your mind, reference the self-care. So that's free. You can download that right from the blog. And through that, you can get a hold of me. You'll get my email and So drop me a line. I also have a free Facebook group that you can join once you join the Quick Guide to Less Than Overwhelm. Once you download that, you'll get the invite to the Facebook group.
Awesome. Cool. And we'll put
Yeah.
all those links in the show notes. So it'll be easy to find. Thanks so much for coming on. It was so fun.
Thank you, Emily. This was wonderful.
Okay, we'll see you next time.